Right. We have got quite a lot of people still joining, but they will still carry on doing that, and Liam will carry on letting people in. Welcome this lunchtime, everyone that's joining us. I think we have got about 400 signed up, so we have got quite a few still to join. I'm Jane Poor. I'm adoption consultant at CoramBAAF, and here today to help with the briefing on the, I was going to say do it, but I'm not doing it really, Elaine's doing it, on the new adoption support plan, which was published on Monday. Do you want to just start the slides, Elaine?
Yes.
So those of you are probably all familiar with us. CoramBAAF represents 94% of local authorities in England and Wales. I think there's about 2 or 3 that are not members for whatever reason. We also cover Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. We are also publishers, and we run lots of online events and training, etc., etc. And if your local authority is a member, then you have direct membership to the website as well and can access everything on there. So just run through a couple of housekeeping things to this in particular. Just if you could keep yourself on mute, please, that would be great. There are going to be a lot of you, so it's quite easy to just broadcast yourself to the nation, so to speak. Turn your camera on if you can, although there's so many of you, we can't actually see most of you with the slides, but it is nice to see some faces and know that we are talking to some people. So we are recording this event and it will be shared as a presentation. The chat is muted because there are so many of you. We will be opening the chat later on, probably about 1:45 for questions in the chat. If you do want to put a question in the chat, it's really nice if we can see what your name is rather than being called iPhone 4 or virtual room 7 or whatever. But don't worry if you can't do that, because we can cope. So that probably just leaves me to welcome Elaine Dibben, who many of you will know as my predecessor at CoramBAAF. Now works as an associate trainer for CoramBAAF, but also does lots and lots of other things, including panel chairs, and she does independent bits of consultancy across the country as well. And Elaine has worked on the adoption support plan that we're going to talk to you about today. So welcome, Elaine. I'm going to hand over to you. Oh, I should just say that if you have a tech problem, you can contact Liam, who is holding it all together ably. You can message him direct, but that's the only person that you can message at the moment. So welcome, everyone. Hi, Elaine.
Thank you, Jane. Right, well, I was going to say lovely to see everybody, but of course I can't see everybody because there's far too many of you. But it is lovely to know that you're all out there and that you're all interested and want to be here today. So thank you very much for joining us. So what I'm going to cover in this briefing, and we've already done one this morning with an audience of predominantly, I think, IROs, is just to kind of go through really the key objectives underpinning the development of the new adoption support plan, to talk a bit about the development work that had taken place that informed the design of the new adoption support plan, and also the learning that we received from the pilot that we ran between April and September last year. And then I'll talk you through a bit about the new adoption support plan and how that's set up, and tell you a bit about the guidance that we've prepared that goes alongside of that. And then just at the end, just to think with you really about how you're going to introduce this into your agencies and how best to kind of prepare the sort of social workers and adopters for the introduction of the ASP. So, the adoption support plan. And I guess I mean, I think the first thing to say really that for us and sort of thinking about developing this adoption support plan now as a standalone document, we view this as a really key document for both the child and their adopters. And I think when you think about kind of what's important information for the child, then obviously first and foremost we would think about a child permanence report, because that holds all the child's history and kind of explanations about kind of why the child needed to be placed for adoption. It's also a document that the child can then have access to through their adopters, hopefully, but also by approaching adoption support agencies as an adopted adult. And it's one of those key documents that they're allowed to have access to. So that's a really crucial document. But I think the other document, which is, again, we hope to a real kind of living document, is the adoption support plan. And that's because it's a plan that's that comes into being really at the point that you're thinking about a child and their needs when you're preparing the child permanence report. But then when you're thinking about matching that child with a particular family, it's then the document that you're going to be using really to set out the child's needs, how those needs are going to be met by the adopters, and what support they're going to need in order to do that, not just in the short term, but also in the long term and through to 18. I think in the past, the adoption support plan has been a bit kind of missing, really. I think it was tucked at the end of the adoption placement report, and I think kind of that once that was the use of that was finished, kind of people tended to forget sometimes that the adoption support plan was a document for ongoing use. So hopefully what we're expecting is that by having this as a standalone document now, it will really kind of come to the fore, and it will be something that adopters will see as a really valuable document that they're able to use as they go forward in their adoption journey. And it will also provide kind of a real core of information for the professionals that are going to engage with them sort of over the course of the child being with them. So the other thing just to say is that if you are placing children as part of a sibling group, then they would each need to have their own adoption support plan. And that will also obviously kind of look at their individual needs and how they're going to be met, and the support that's going to be needed for them and their adopters, but also to then look kind of wider at the needs of them as part of a support group. And that might be a sort of sibling group, and that might be children who are living with them in the adoptive family, but it also may be siblings who are placed elsewhere. But in the instance of sort of thinking about preparing adoption support plans, each child needs their own adoption support plan. The other thing I think to say is that we know that this is a plan that's a document that's going to change over time. So obviously when you're first preparing an adoption support plan, a child might be quite young. There might still be information that we don't know that will come to light sort of, some might have come to light during care proceedings, but it may be as things move on that more information will come to light either from birth family members themselves, from what we find out and discover as the child's sort of in their adoption placement, and other things start to come up. So the needs inevitably will change as things go through. So the adoption support plan is a document that is going to need to change and be reviewed over time. So as I say, there will be various different sort of times at which the adoption support plan is being used. It's first drawn up as a draft as part of the paperwork that's required when the proposed match is being presented to the adoption panel. Once the panel has made their recommendation and the agency decision maker has made the decision, that adoption support plan can then be confirmed as the sort of final adoption support plan. And as I say, it's a document that we hope adopters will feel able to refer to once the child's living with them, as they find issues that come up where they feel that they need support. And the document will have everything from kind of practical information, such as the names, addresses, phone numbers of people they might need to contact. It might signpost them to particular services or provisions, but it will also kind of set out, if you like, kind of the local authority's promise to them in terms of what support will be available to them. We also envisage that it will be a really useful document for adoption support team workers, where adopters then come back for adoption support services after the child's been adopted. And I think in the past, because there has been an absence of kind of a recognition of this form and what it contains, that I think sometimes adoption support teams have felt that sort of having to start from scratch really when they're meeting with adopters and trying to kind of look at what's happened before and what they're now sort of presenting as in terms of their needs. So I think that some of the adoption support workers who've been involved in the development of this feel that this is going to be a really helpful document for them as a sort of baseline to sort of think about kind of where they go next after when they're kind of then completing their own assessment of support needs. And one of the reasons that we are introducing the adoption support plan to you now, I think, is from over time, I guess, the feedback that we've had from adopters, really, which shows that some of them have very limited knowledge or awareness of an adoption support plan and what it is. And certainly some of them feel that they've had very little involvement or investment into it. So the feedback that we had from the Adoption Barometer published by Adoption UK in 2023, which would have been gathered probably in 2022, so 32% of those adopters who responded, who were new adopters, so these were ones that had recent placements rather than long-standing adopters. So 32%, about a third, said that they had a written plan for adoption support. 21% of them weren't sure if they had it. And there's a whole other set that we don't really know kind of whether they even knew what it was. 25% of people said they didn't see the adoption support plan until after the child had been placed with them. And 8% said that they were not shown the plan until they'd asked to see it. And the overall feedback was that where there were plans in place, it was felt that there was considerable variation in what they contained. When you think about that, as I say, the adoption support plan has been part of the adoption placement report for a long number of years. We also have a section in the adoption placement report where adopters are being asked to comment on their views about the support plan and their views about the contact that the child's going to be having with birth family members and others. So it's hard to understand why people wouldn't feel that they'd seen the plan and have an idea of what was in it and what was being promised to them. In terms of kind of their involvement in it, again, just under a third had said that the social worker had involved them in creating the plan. About another third had said that they hadn't seen a draft version of the support plan. They hadn't been given an opportunity to ask questions or to give any suggestions before they received the plan in its final form. About half of them who did have a written plan said that they were somewhat happy with it, and about a third of them were very happy with it. The others, I think, were apparently reserving judgment because they felt it was too early to know whether this plan was going to meet their needs and the needs of their child or children. Interestingly, as part of the development of the form, Adoption UK set up a focus group for me to join, which was open to adopters who'd adopted children in the last 7 years. So some of them were very recent, and some of them had been had adopted quite a few years ago now. Almost all of them kind of gave very similar responses to the ones that I've just read out to you there. So quite a number of them hadn't had a support plan, didn't really know what it was, certainly didn't know how they could access where they would get it now. I mean, it was, it wasn't a document that they had access to and were using on a regular basis. And some of the ones that were kind of more recently adopted, who did have them, sort of felt very positive about them. But there was a lot of, there was quite a lot of sort of negative feedback really about the sort of lack of their involvement in thinking about what support was going to be available to their family. The original adoption support plan was developed back in 2015, so 10 years ago. At that time, there was no national adoption support plan in use, so agencies kind of were drafting their own if they were using them. And as part of the kind of growing interest really in adoption support and adoption support being provided to adopters post-adoption, we developed the current adoption support plan, and we incorporated it into the adoption placement report because we were trying at that point not to provide too much more paperwork for social workers, and we thought that this would be a document that people would use and then would continue to kind of use and review once the placement was made. I think unfortunately what happened was, as I say, it kind of it was sort of viewed as this thing at the end of the adoption placement report, and probably kind of lost any sort of ongoing life of its own, really. So so back in 2023, Adoption England, as part of their programme of looking at all kind of areas of practice in adoption, so those that were involved in looking at adoption support and how to improve adoption support services, saw developing a new adoption support plan that could be standalone as a key way of being able to start thinking about kind of adoption support services. So workers that were involved in that development were involved in both kind of matching and supporting prospective adopters, and also some were involved in adoption support teams. So they thought about what information would be helpful to see in the form that was not in the previous one. We joined together with them then. We completed a pilot version of the adoption support plan, which is not too different from what you see now. And we also wrote accompanying guidance for social workers who are completing the form, for the adopters themselves, so they had an understanding of what this form was, and how they could use it. And then also a separate guide specifically for independent reviewing officers to sort of focus particularly on the reviewing aspect of the adoption support plan. And the final versions were all published on Monday. So they're now out there and available for your use. So interestingly, although there's plenty of reference in regulations and guidance to agencies, the agency must carry out an assessment of the needs of the child, the needs of the prospective adopter, and any children of the prospective adoptive family for adoption support services. There is no template in legislation. So we have a schedule that sets out what should be in an adoption placement report or adoption placement plan. We don't have the equivalent of that for the adoption support plan, which is why, in a sense, what we've got now is something that's been very much thought about by kind of people involved in adoption, thinking about what's the information that they will need as professionals, but also that adopters are going to need to have them a full understanding and overview of the child that's coming to them and what their needs are and how those needs are going to be met. The other thing that obviously regulation and stat guidance kind of highlights is the importance of thinking about arrangements for future contact between the child and their birth family members and other people important to them. And again, that's one of the areas that we've really kind of beefed up in thinking about keeping in touch plans for children and how those are going to be put in place. So when we were pulling together the adoption support plan, these were the things that we wanted to achieve, and I think we have achieved. So obviously to meet all of the statutory requirements in sort of regulations and legislation and guidance, we've separated it out from the adoption placement report, so it's now much more visible, and it can be seen as a standalone document, which will have an ongoing use throughout the child's adoption journey. We've tried to kind of make it much more kind of child-focused and child-friendly, really. So we've kind of got rid of the notion of a grid that people are trying to squeeze lots of information into, and any sort of sense of a tick box. So we're now looking at kind of a form that really asks for kind of people to put in kind of summaries, but, you know, a narrative really of who the child is, what their support needs are now and what they are likely to be or may be in the future, and to sort of have a more holistic view really of the family that are going to be taking the child into their home, and also to kind of encourage more analysis from social workers about what the support needs are going to be. We're bringing all of this information together into one report, and that does mean that there will be a bit of duplication. So inevitably, in order to understand the child and their needs, you need to have some sense of why this child needs adoption, what their previous experiences have been. So there are points in the report where we're asking for a summary of kind of what's happened to the child in the past, what led to them needing to be adopted. And the reason that we're doing that is that we want this to be a standalone document. So you know, if we have a bit that says, you know, refer to the CPR, refer to another document in order to kind of get this full and sort of holistic picture, then we know that's not going to happen. So I think we feel that it's really important that we have a document that can be standalone and that will give a sort of full sense of what's happened to the child previously, where they are now, and what they're going to need in the future. We've also beefed up, I guess, the section around sort of support to adopters. So, I mean, previously we would have set out the agency and what the agency was able to offer to adopters in terms of support. But I think it's been recognised that when we're assessing adopters, we do a lot of work with them around identifying their strengths, identifying their vulnerabilities, and then thinking about what the support needs of that family might be, given the sort of vulnerabilities that we've identified. And so we wanted to include that as part of this form, really. And so there is a section in the report where we're looking at support to adopters, and we're identifying specifically the vulnerabilities that were seen through the assessment, and thinking about what support now might need to be in place to address those potential areas of vulnerability. We've also we also want to kind of ensure, and I guess this is part of the message that we're giving in part of these briefings, really, is to really encourage people to include adopters in the development of the support plan. That this isn't something that's just imposed upon them, that we have discussions with them about where they think they might need support, and we make sure that those things are reflected in the support plan. And the other thing that we really wanted to highlight in this is that this is a support plan that needs to be reviewed, and the place that it's reviewed is in the childcare reviews that are held once the child's been placed for adoption. One of the reasons that we've held a separate briefing for IROs, so that they're fully aware of the form. But you know, all we can do is kind of potentially try and predict what children's needs are going to be and what support might be needed. And so they know that once the child's been placed with their family, that the unknowns that there may have been when we were placing the child, that things will change over time, and we need to make sure, therefore, that the adoption support plan is being updated regularly to reflect that. And certainly in the point up to the time of the adoption order, we can do that through the looked after children reviews. We're really grateful to the agencies that piloted the adoption support plan. So we had Adoption West, Adopt North, London North, Aspire Adoption, Adopt Thames Valley, and Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So some of them kind of just started using it with all their adoption placements. Some, particularly where they were working with a number of local authorities, perhaps just chose matches that were coming from a particular local authority so that they could kind of use the same social workers, and social workers could become more familiar with it. And we then had feedback from them at the end, in terms of feedback from social workers, from adopters, from a couple of panels and a couple of IROs. And that just helped us, on the top of the feedback that we had from our steering group, just to think about any tweaks that we needed to make to the form in its final version. And I'm pleased to say that there weren't too many kind of major things. It was mainly just tweaks that we needed to do. As I said earlier, we did some work with Adoption UK so that we got input from adopters, and we've also kind of used the CoramBAAF stakeholder groups to share the form in its development with various different groups of people. And I've talked to you about the guidance. So moving on. So this is the form. That's your front sheet. There are 5 areas in the adoption support plan. The first bit is very factual. So it will be all the contact details and names of the key professionals that are going to be involved in setting up the placement and in supporting the placement once the child's with the family. The second bit, which I guess is the key bit that you'll be familiar with, but in a different form, really is then looking at kind of the information about the child. And so within that, we've got basically all of the kind of what used to be kind of boxes, really. But so we've got information about the child, their likes, their dislikes, who the important people are for them. We have a section that's around sort of understanding the child's experiences. So that's where we'd be putting in the summary about the child's early life experiences, and just thinking about kind of what support needs are already started to be put in place to help the child develop sort of maintain those relationships with the people who are important to them. There's a section obviously on child's emotional behavioural development, and again, thinking about what needs are, how they're currently being supported, and then what future support is needed, including any kind of assessments that there have been and any recommendations from that. We have a whole section on health, and we've kind of included in there a little bit more really detail around children with disabilities and what additional support might be needed for them, particularly sort of following transitions. Similarly, we have a whole section on education, and some of the kind of information that's needed there about who's going to help set up new schools, for example, the involvement of virtual schools, and any other kind of more specialist education provisions that are going to be in place. We've got a whole section on identity, which specifically looks at what how the child's been prepared for their move into adoption, what they understand about what's happened to them previously, and then all the things that we know are so important for children, but that sometimes get lost. So memory boxes, life story work, and later life letters. And then we've got a section around kind of the child's ethnicity and culture, religion, and gender and sexuality, so that all of those things are covered as they're appropriate to the child. There's a section just that pulls together what's happening during transitions, and then we move into a whole section around the contact plans, the staying in touch plans. And I guess what we wanted to do in that was kind of just highlight, I suppose, some of the differences in terms of practice or the developments in practice. So we've asked about an initial meeting between the adopters and the child's birth parents or other family members and how that's going to be supported. And if there is a decision that that meeting shouldn't happen, we've asked for kind of that reasons for that to be set out. We've asked what the plans are for the child to stay connected, and if it's not going to be a face-to-face or direct contact, that the reasons for that are clearly set out. And where there is going to be indirect contact through sort of either sort of letterbox or digital exchanges, we've also asked about any kind of restrictions on photographs, and again kind of asked people just to kind of explain why they would be there. So we've tried to kind of cover some of those important things. In the section around adopters and their support, as I say, we've got that reflection of any vulnerabilities that were identified through the assessment process. We've also asked about who their informal support is going to come from. So from their family and their friends, from people that they've maybe met going through the adoption process who are in a similar situation to themselves, and just recognising that informal support is so key to prospective adopters and adopters in the early days of placement, as well as kind of moving forward, really. We've asked about whether or not any network support meetings have been held, just to try and pull that informal support together. And then we have another section which is looking at the more formalised support that's offered through the agency in terms of core services, and then obviously any therapeutic needs that there might be, and any therapeutic support through the Adoption Support Fund or other means. We have a separate section around adoption support to the birth family, and that sets out all of the potential areas of support that are defined in the statutory guidance. That can be separated away from the main form, so that that's sort of shared with the birth family members and signed by them. And then we have our new section, which is around the review of the adoption support plan. And so there's a section, so each section of the adoption support plan has a corresponding area where you can update things that have happened since the time that the child's been placed. So that can be then used as information for the child in care review, where it can then be reviewed as part of the review process, and then there's a space for it to be updated again and following the review with any actions and changes that have been agreed through that review. Okay, so what I think is different about it, as I say, there's more descriptive summaries of need, and we ask, that the support is identified, that we share, we kind of put in information about who's providing that support, and also give details of the timescales and the review of any of those services. We've made sure, I think, that the child is more at the heart of the report, so it importantly explores their understanding of their life story and their adoption journey, acknowledge the kind of vulnerabilities of the adopters. We've got the separate section for the birth family, and we've got our separate section to be used before and after the LAC review, because this, as I said before, is a living document. It's a document that we want to continue to be used, to be valued by the adopters, and to have an ongoing kind of meaning for them. So some of the concerns, I think, that they were particularly thinking about adopters really was like, how are they going to understand that this is yet another form that they have to, they have to see, they have to read, they have to comment on. So within the guidance to adopters, we've got this nice little chart that just sets out what these key forms are going to be that adopters are going to be experiencing during the kind of matching and placement process, really. So the child's permanence report, which is written during care proceedings, it's been shared with the adopters and then hopefully is updated when the match goes to panel. And that, you know, we still see as a key document that the adopters are going to be able to keep safe, both for themselves to use and also to sort of later on share with the child. The adoption placement report, which, you know, sets out why this is a suitable match for the child, sets out how adopters are going to meet the child's needs. But really, once the placement's been made, that's a report that will be consigned to the adoption file. It's not going to have any ongoing use. We then have the adoption support plan, which is part of all of that panel paperwork, but will be continued to use, will be reviewed through the childcare reviews, and then will inform adoption support assessments that are requested after the child's been adopted. And then we have the adoption placement plan, which again is a very specific plan that looks at how you're going to place the child. It thinks about the plans for introductions and transitions, and the notifications that are going to be made to other agencies about the child moving in. And really, once the child is placed, that again is a form that's kind of consigned back to the adoption file. So the two forms that we really want kind of adopters to know and understand about are the child permanence report and the adoption support plan. Within the adopter's guide, we just set out quite simply really what the support plan is. We talk a bit about kind of how it's going to be completed. And again, this is something that's also covered in the social work guide, because it is just that thinking really about how you're going to pull together the adoption support plan. Some agencies, and this would be seen, I guess, as sort of best practice, have actually put in place an adoption support plan meeting. And that would be attended by a childcare social worker, the adopter's social worker, possibly a family finding social worker, and ideally the adopters. So it would be pulling together all of the information that's already there, but really thinking with and involving the adopters in thinking about what support they're going to need going forward. That's the ideal. I'm sure people are thinking, but there's so much that we have to do in order to get all the matching paperwork for panel. So I guess the other thing we'd be suggesting is then look at your processes, that look at what you're doing already. Could it be fitted in at the end of a matching meeting or a linking meeting? How else can you make sure that adopters are going to be included in the development and the sort of finalising of the adoption support plan? And they need to see the plan, because they have that opportunity, as I say, to comment on the support that's being proposed, and that will be part of the adoption placement report. And it's certainly something that adoption panel members will be looking at when they're reading the paperwork, and will often ask people about during the course of the panel meeting is, you know, whether adopters are happy with the support, and certainly picking up on any comments that they might have made about their views on the support that have been included in the adoption placement report. We talk about the placement planning meeting and how the adoption support plan will then be finalised. And we set out for adopters within the guidance just kind of what they can expect in terms of social work visits during those early sort of months before the adoption order, and also kind of childcare reviews and the reviewing process. And we highlight to the adopters in the guidance that adopters can request additional reviews if they need them. So we've got this kind of set times in terms of statutory times, but we do also kind of make adopters aware that, as set out in guidance, that they can request further reviews if they feel that there's a need. And then, as I say, post-adoption, we kind of encourage them to think about the adoption support plan as information that they would take to the adoption support team, where they are wanting to sort of seek further support from the agency, or possibly even feeling that the needs are so great that there needs to be a new assessment of their adoption support needs. And that may then in time lead to a new adoption support plan. But for many families, it might just be that ongoing kind of support through the sort of core services is enough, and that the adoption support plan can just remain in place for them. The guide for social workers, we've got lots of prompts in the guidance to help you think about what you might need to include in the various sections. So there's lots of those. It is the longest guide, but I think particularly if this is something that you haven't completed, or social workers haven't completed before, it will really help you think about the information that you need to include in this report. Over time, I'm sure people will feel that they kind of don't need to use this so much, but I would encourage people to kind of at least read it initially and try and sort of make use of it when you're doing kind of the first few reports that you're doing. We do sort of set out in the guidance that people need to think about who's going to be the lead coordinator for the adoption support plan. So, and I know that will be different in different agencies. So in some agencies, they might be using the family finding social worker. In others, it might be the childcare worker. If it's going to be an interagency placement with a voluntary adoption agency, really important for everybody to be really clear about who's coordinating the gathering of that information. I've talked about the adoption support planning meeting and how we need to think about how we keep adopters involved. I think just kind of reminding workers that they need to consult with the adoption support services so that they're aware of any commitments that you're making as part of the adoption support plan, and that they're also able to kind of comment on, maybe, you know, and potentially, I think particularly around sort of keeping in touch plans, it can be really helpful to consult with adoption support services to just give some advice about kind of how things might work. And then again, we talk about the importance of reviews. So that's an ongoing theme. The guidance for the IROs really just sets out kind of what they already know in terms of the purpose of the childcare reviews once the child's in an adoption placement. So we do kind of just highlight again the kind of expectations around social work visits, the role of the childcare review in reviewing the adoption support plan, as well as kind of other aspects of the placement. We highlight the fact that adopters have delegated PR at this point, so they do need to be included and involved in the discussions within the review, and that they should always be consulted in terms of what's being proposed. And I think one of the part of the feedback that we had from reviewing officers, and we were talking with them about earlier really, is it may be that the adoption support plan as it is now, particularly with the updating bit at the end of it, will replace or duplicate some of the forms that you're currently using, or that the local authority is currently using for child in care reviews of children who are placed for adoption. We're obviously not looking to kind of create lots of duplications, so it might be that this form can replace what's being used, or it might be that it will replace some part of it, and therefore there can just be a kind of, you know, refer to the adoption support plan in that section. So we don't know what your review forms look like, but it's something for you to be thinking about and to be liaising with the IROs about, so that we aren't asking social workers to duplicate information. Because the important bit is it does need to be in the adoption support plan, because that's the document that the adopters are going to take away and are going to be holding on to. So it's not enough that it goes and sits on a social work file somewhere. It needs to be that kind of living document that adopters continue to sort of hold and value. So our feedback from the pilot, and this is something for you to be thinking about. So for social workers, absolutely, we kind of recognise that there's a lot of additional, you know, it feels like additional work initially, because it will end up as a longer form than you were doing before. There was a concern about the fact that we were duplicating some of the information that was already in the adoption placement report. So the good news about that is that we've now amended the adoption placement report. So most of the information about the adoption support needs are now in the adoption support plan. All that we've left in the adoption placement report is what are the child's needs and how the adopter is going to meet them. And you need that in the adoption placement report, because this is a matching report and shows how, you know, kind of how we're satisfied that this is going to be a match that will work. There was some concern from social workers about whether adopters were going to understand what the adoption support plan was, because they were so overwhelmed with all the paperwork. But I have to say that wasn't borne out from the adopters' feedback. And certainly what I would suggest is that where you're when you're providing adopters with the adoption support plan, you do also give them the guidance, because that will help them to understand the importance and the value that we're placing on this adoption support plan. So yes, again, depending on who's completing the adoption support plan, you know, there's a lot of additional work happening at that time. So social workers that are also having to complete and update the CPR will be having to do this report at the same time as that in preparation for panel. We don't apologise for that, because, as I say, it is important that this adoption support plan is a document in its own right. But I think hopefully, and I think what will start to happen is as people become more familiar with the forms, then obviously it does get easier. But there is, and the more you think about them sort of from earlier in the process, the more you'll be kind of clear about what information needs to go in this report. One family finding team liked the support plan being separate, but said they preferred the grid. But that wasn't a view shared by most people. And these, I think, are some really positive comments from social workers, which do kind of really highlight how we see it and why we think it's important. So one says, I really like the new support plan. It gives a good comprehensive overview of the child and is much more friendly and child-centred. I look forward to using the support plan again in the future. It's a positive change. As I said, I think these are much easier to work from. I like that they're very much part of a reviewing process for the child. It feels much more user-friendly than the grid. It feels much more likely to be used by adopters in the future. And another said, the plan feels like a much easier document to complete if the work to complete it has been done. I think once people have this much more in mind when completing child information sessions, medical advisor meetings and discussions with adopters ahead of and during linking, they will become much easier to complete. And I think, you know, the pilot was a relatively short period of time. So there were people kind of providing feedback who'd just done 1 or 2 forms, really. And it does take time to get used to a new form. The adopters gave really positive feedback. So they felt that the objectives had been met. Those that had seen it all felt that the adopters guide had been helpful. There was some interesting feedback from adopters who were adopting for a second time, so they were able to make comparisons with the forms that they'd had previously. So one said, we adopted more than one child. Our children's support plans were very different. We also know of another family who seemed to have not such detailed plans. We think this format was different to ours. It would be great if all formats were the same. And another one said, I've gone back and thought about the process I had with my other child. I've not needed the adoption support fund, but did not clearly remember the support bit. This was more important for my next child, and I like that it's separate. What was really interesting was that the feedback from adopters was also very positive about the adoption support plan being reviewed. So one said, we're not at the final bit yet, the adoption order, but the review has happened through meetings and discussions. We like this format. It was reviewed before we got our order. It's been regularly reviewed, which worked well for us as we kept having new information to deal with. Another said, we wait to concentrate on small stuff too. I would say the agency must review it. It's constantly out of date. And can it be highlighted that we as adoptive parents can ask for additional reviews? And then the last one says, review, review, review. It always changes. This has been so helpful. Give regular advice to social workers for reviewing. It worked well. That was very nice. We also had positive feedback from a couple of panels in the RAAs. One said, we've given feedback that's almost universally positive. We like the separate form, and now the team are getting more used to completing them. There's less duplication across the two. And the others, another one also kind of talked about the fact that the forms were easier to read, and they also brought the child to life more. So in terms of the changes, as I say, kind of relatively minor, we've updated the APRs to reduce the duplication. We've added some prompts and guidance around financial support. We've added additional sections around the transitions of services for children with disabilities. We've taken out a couple of things that were duplicating information in the new CPR. And we've improved formatting and the guidance. And there's also a very clever bit that Jane's done, which is that in the form, if you hover your mouse above certain bits, the guidance from the guidance form comes up on your screen. Amazing what technology can do. You probably be aware of this, but just so you're clear about kind of current adoption, CoramBAAF adoption forms. So the APR 2025 is only for use if you're using the Adoption Support Plan 2025, but the APR 2018 will continue to be available for agencies that are not using the Adoption Support Plan. You may be using your own, or it may be certainly in some of the other countries in the UK, they won't necessarily be using the new form at the moment. The new CPR is being published next month. And there's a work started on a new PAR, which will be published next year, at which time the APR will also be updated into a final version. So I think this is just some kind of hints and ideas really from the agencies that have been involved in piloting the form, really, in terms of how kind of to best roll this out. So I think where it worked best, and we had, particularly for one of the agencies that joined later, they did a lot of work around kind of briefings with their childcare and adoption teams, briefings for panel members, IROs, really important so that they understand kind of where this fits in their processes, and adoption support teams. And you'll be able to use the presentation from today in those briefings if you want to do that. To think about how you're going to do those adoption support plan meetings, or how else you're going to involve adopters in the planning for adoption support. And I think when you are talking to, particularly when you're doing those briefings, I think just to highlight what we think are going to be the long-term benefits of having a standalone adoption support plan that feels like a kind of document that adopters can kind of come back to, that will and that will have an ongoing kind of meaning for them. And the fact that certainly it's been very well received by the adopters through the pilot. I think just to acknowledge and allow additional time for workers to become familiar with the new form. And obviously, once people have been using the form, I mean, panels are very good, I think, at providing feedback on when they've seen, a good report. And it might be that you'd want to kind of anonymize a few of those and have those exemplars for other workers that are starting to use them. Agree a start date for when you're going to start using the form once you've done your briefings and training. And I think have some discussion with the IROs and your IRO service about kind of how the adoption support plan is going to be integrated. How the adoption support plan is going to be integrated into the paperwork that you need for reviews, so that there isn't kind of further duplication at that point in time. So Jane and I are very happy to have feedback from you, or kind of any questions that you've got afterwards. So that's our contact details there. And thank you very much. And now I will stop sharing, and then we have got a bit of time, I think, for questions. Anything that you want to kind of add in at this point?
Thanks, Elaine. That's really, really great. We are going to open the chat now. So if you have got a question, can you please put it in the chat? Whilst you're doing that, I will just run through a couple of things. You will get a copy of the slides, so you will be able to use them, as Elaine said. Also, just to reiterate what Elaine said, if you're using the new support plan, please use the new APR 2025, because there's less duplication. If you're not using this support plan, continue to use the 2018 APR, which is still there and you can still use. If you don't know how to get the form, if you're thinking, well, it's all very well, you're saying you published it on Monday, I've not seen it, the link will have gone to whoever is your CoramBAAF link person in your organisation. So you need to find out who that person is. If you're not sure, then drop forms a line and they will help identify them for you, or membership will be able to help you as well. They will have been sent the link to the new forms, and that's where you download the new versions of forms for your organisation. Yes, this form does have pop-ups in it, so you hover your mouse and a little bit of the guidance comes up. It is limited to, I think, about 100 words, so people really still need the proper guidance to start with, but is really useful. I can't take any credit for that, and Georgina, who's on this call somewhere, is the tech wizard who has got to grips with pop-ups and is now pop-up queen, and it's great. So that is that. Any questions in here? Right. Is the expectation that the new form will be used in post-adoption? Yes, it's supposed to be ongoing. It's supposed to be reviewed, I think, isn't it, Elaine?
Yeah, I think the feedback that we've had from adoption support colleagues is that what they're, I think, really hoping to be able to do is use this as the sort of starting point. So if you've got, if you have families that are coming to adoption support teams for support, then in the past previously that you may have kind of almost had to sort of start from scratch, really. What you should expect now is that the adopters should have a copy of the adoption support plan that they can share with you. Similarly, it will obviously be on file with the agency, and it will give you a starting point, really. And it rather depends on at what point adopters come back for support. So if it's within the sort of first couple of years or so of the child being placed, then it will feel very relevant, and I guess it will form part of any kind of assessment that you want to do kind of around further adoption support needs. If you've got a family that's coming back kind of a number of years later, then inevitably it will form the basis of your assessment. But then, as I say, you then may, as a result of that and looking at kind of their current situation, then kind of actually be providing them with a new adoption support plan. So it will rather depend on the sort of level of need and how much support you're going to need to put in and how much things have changed. But I think what adoption support colleagues have felt was it will definitely give you a really kind of clear starting point when you're sort of thinking about kind of how you're going to start to work with this family.
Thanks, Elaine. And I think you've begun to answer the next question there, if not completely. So the next question from Sarah is there further guidance on how post-adoption support team will review and update these plans? Should this plan be used verbatim by post-adoption support teams?
Yes. So I think, as I say, I think you should see it as a sort of starting point. I mean, I think, Jane, there has been some additional guidance that was published quite recently, I think, by John Simmons.
Yes.
And that,
So
and certainly John and Caroline, who did that, were aware of this. And I think, again, within what they've drafted up, they were seeing this as a sort of starting point for then the work that's set out in their guide.
Yeah, and that focuses more on the assessment of need for returning families. So it kind of, you're right, kind of complements this.
Yeah, it kind of, it's a one, really.
Yeah, would you advise writing the document to the child about the child?
I know that we are doing that, and I think with the child permanence report, I think people are starting to look at those things. I think that would be difficult with this particular form because it's actually going to be kind of read and looked at by a number of professionals who will be needing information rather than who will be needing the information in a way that's not been kind of written for a child. So I would actually say no, I don't think.
This is almost like the family's report, really, isn't it?
It's kind of, yeah, I mean, it's pulling together the needs of the child, the family. It's being written for the adopters. It's mainly written for the adopters and the professionals that are going to be working alongside the family. So I think in that instance, I would say no.
Thank you, Elaine. Is the plan for immediate implementation? Yes, it is available it's been uploaded into your access. So if you've got a forms license, you can download it and start using it. But bear in mind those things that Elaine said at the end of her presentation about ways of introducing it to your teams and make a plan going forward about how you're going to go about doing that, I would think. When can we see the full report template? So ditto, it's there for you now. You can download it. Could we know a bit more about the input from birth parents?
So it's not so much input from birth parents. I mean, obviously, there's a separate section around the support that's going to be provided to birth parents. And what we have done there is sort of set out what the regulatory sort of guidance is around what should be provided. So it does ask really whether people are being given access to independent counselling, whether they're being given support around contact and keeping in touch plans, whether your agency runs support groups for birth parents and any other kind of input or sort of signposting that you're doing to other agencies, but that's a sort of separate thing around their support needs. So it wouldn't. I think if you're looking for kind of input from the birth parents on the child, that's probably more likely the stuff that's being included in the CPR than the adoption support plan.
Yeah, thank you. I think it also ties in with the work we've been doing on updating the CPR, and there has been direct involvement of birth parents there. We have met with the birth parent advisory group as well. So we've kind of taken on board their feedback about what they want in terms of support. Where there is a VAA involved and RAA, who signs the plan, as there are 2 adoption social workers and teams?
They can all sign the plan because I would imagine that both agencies are planning to offer support to the adopters. But as I say, the ultimate responsibility for the report will be somebody from the child's placing agency. But everybody that's going to be involved in providing services should be signing the report.
Yeah. Statutory duty always remains with the local authority. Liam's helpfully put a link to the guidance from John Simmons and Caroline Thomas there. Is in the chat if you want it. CPR is not necessarily written to the child. I think we could debate that long and hard. I'm not sure I agree with that. Always write part of it if you want. Is licenses at CoramBAAF.org, but you email to email it then? Yes, that's fine. They are a bit busy. We have just launched the Form K as well last week, and then we've done adoption support plan this week. So we are a bit busy at the moment, but I'm sure they will get back to you. We can follow that up for you. Will this be a document which is accessible to an adopted person once they become an adult? I would hope so.
Okay.
Absolutely. Liam's put the address there for licenses at coram.org.uk. Is there any guidance on how we integrate this into our computer systems, e.g. LCS recording? That's beyond me. So there's basically Liquid Logic, there's Charms, there's Eclipse, and there's one other. Those are the 4 main systems, and in updating our forms we have taken that into account, because we were initially quite ambitious about what we wanted to do electronically, and then we've been limited by it having to be embedded in your systems. I'm afraid you will have to go to your own IT people and find that out for yourself. Can we add the family finder social workers to the signature page, as they have a huge input into? I think they're on there, aren't they, Elaine?
Yeah, they are on there. I've just looked. They are on there. So
yeah,
I mean, again, I think in different RAAs, that family finding social workers hold a different role. But yeah, they are.
Yeah, and I think that's it for now for questions. Oh, one more. I would like to attach the adoption support plan to the LCS task when writing an adoption report post-placement, and attach the ASP to the report so it can continue to a standalone document but shared at the point of review, then updating as agreed. Fantastic. if your system will let you do that. Is this a document that could be included into an EHCP? I think there is a big space on it for EHCP stuff, isn't there, Elaine?
There is a section in there. I think not all of it, because obviously, remember, some of it's around the adopters and the adopter support, and obviously that couldn't be included. So, but you could certainly take some of the information out of it.
Yeah, it acknowledges that EHCPs exist, and it's kind of works alongside it. Yeah. And I think that's it for now. So excellent timing. all that remains is for me to say thank you all very much for attending. There is a repeat of this briefing tomorrow morning. If there's anyone not being able to make this that wants to attend, the recording will be uploaded to our system at some point, and you will be sent the slides out at some point as well, so that you can use Elaine's. I know Elaine's very happy for you to use that presentation in training your teams and talking about it in your organizations. Anybody else got any burning questions? Thank you. Yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you, Elaine. See you tomorrow.
Yes, thank you very much.
For the repeat.
Yes. You know, and if there is any kind of comments or feedback, say I'm happy for people to get in touch and kind of give us a bit of feedback on it once you've got it operating in your agencies. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.